This is just a little creepy. My name is Tracy. Let's get into today's video. In December of 1952, London was no stranger to fog. Locals even had a nickname for it, pea soupers. But what rolled in on December 5th wasn't ordinary fog. It was the deadliest environmental disaster the city had ever seen. It started with the weather. A cold snap settled over the city, forcing Londoners to burn more coal than usual. Most homes still relied on cheap low-grade coal that released huge amounts of smoke, ash, and sulfur when burned. At the same time, London's factories, power stations, and even the buses and trains were pumping out their own exhaust into the winter air. Normally, winds would carry much of this pollution away, but that week, the air above London turned deadly still. A weather inversion where a layer of warm air sits on top of colder air acted like a lid, trapping the pollution at ground level. All of it mixed with the natural fog to form a thick, poisonous cloud of sulfur dioxide, soot, and other chemicals. At first, people weren't alarmed. The fog was part of London, but by nightfall, the smog grew so dense that visibility dropped to just a few feet. Cars crawled along with their headlights inches from the ground. Buses had conductors walking in front of them, guiding drivers through the yellow haze. Pedestrians stumbled and collided because they literally couldn't see their own feet. The city ground to a halt. Ambulances couldn't move, trains stopped, even indoor spaces weren't safe. The smog seeped into homes, theatres, and hospitals. At a concert hall, the audience couldn't see the performers on stage. People wore scarves over their mouths, but it made little difference. What no one realised at first is how deadly the air had become. Within hours, hospitals were overwhelmed with people struggling to breathe. Those with asthma, bronchitis, or heart conditions were hit the hardest. The death toll climbed by the day, and when the smog finally lifted 5 days later, at least 4,000 people were dead. Later studies estimated the real number was closer to 12,000 lives lost, with many more left with lifelong health problems. The shock forced the government to act. In 1956, Britain passed the Clean Air Act, a landmark law that banned the burning of coal in certain areas, encouraged smokeless fuels, and required industries to clean up their emissions. It was one of the first environmental laws of its kind and reshaped how cities thought about pollution. Later versions of the Act would tighten restrictions further, all born out of those 5 deadly days in London. The Great Smog of 1952 revealed just how dangerous unchecked pollution could be, but for those who lived through it, their memory remained haunting. A week when the air itself turned against the city, suffocating thousands in silence. Now to France in 1393. Under the troubled reign of King Charles VI, known as Charles the Mad for his bouts of insanity, his reign was already unstable. But nothing prepared the French court for the horror of Bal d'Ardents, the Ball of Burning Men. And I hope I pronounced that right. My French is not great. The occasion was festive. The remarriage of a noblewoman at the Hôtel Saint-Paul in Paris. To amuse the guests, the king and 5 courtiers choose to perform a wild dance dressed as wood savages. They donned linen costumes coated in pitch and resin, then covered themselves in flax to look like shaggy wild men. It was meant to be shocking, primal, and a little grotesque. Perfect entertainment for a masquerade. But no one considered just how dangerous the costumes were. The flammable resin and flax turned the dancers into walking torches. During the performance, the king's brother, the Duke of Orleans, entered the hall with a torch. Perhaps drunk, perhaps careless, he waved it too close. The flame caught. In seconds, one dancer went up in fire. The flames leapt from man to man, consuming their costumes. The hall erupted in screams. Guests rushed forward, trying desperately to smother the flames with cloaks and gowns. Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, showing remarkable courage, threw her own skirts over the king to protect him. Charles VI survived, as did one courtier who managed to dive into a vat of wine. But 4 of the king's companions burned alive in front of the horrid nobility. The smell of burning bodies filled the hall. The tragedy wasn't just personal, it sent shockwaves through France. To many, the fire was more than an accident, it was divine judgment, a sign of God's wrath against a corrupt and decadent court. Whispers spread that the monarchy was cursed, that the king's own folly had invited disaster. For Charles VI, already fragile and struggling with bouts of mental illness, the horror only deepened the sense that his reign was doomed. The Ball des Ardents became etched in memory as more than a masquerade gone wrong. It was a chilling symbol of recklessness, a night of celebration that turned into an inferno, and a turning point where royal vanity was laid bare before the people. On the morning of December 6, 1917, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada was an ordinary busy port city. World War I raged overseas, and Halifax had become a major supply hub for the Allied ships. That morning, the harbour bustled as always. Workers heading to the docks, children walking to school, families going about their day. But then came a chain of accidents that would devastate the city in ways no one could have imagined. At around 8:45 a.m, 2 ships collided in the harbour's narrow channel. One was the SS Imo, a Norwegian relief vessel. The other was SS Mont Blanc, a French cargo ship, and it carried a deadly secret. Its hold was packed with thousands of tons of explosives, TNT, picric acid, and benzol, one of the most volatile cargoes ever assembled. The collision itself wasn't catastrophic. The ship scraped and sparks flew, igniting barrels of benzo on the Mont Blanc's deck. As the flames spread, the crew abandoned the ship, desperately warning people of the danger, but most onlookers didn't understand the scale of the threat. Crowds gathered at windows and along the waterfront to watch the burning ship drift closer to shore, unaware they were staring at a floating bomb. At 9:04 a.m, the Mont Blanc exploded. The blast was so powerful, it vaporized the ship instantly. A pressure wave leveled entire neighborhoods, snapping trees, twisting steel, and hurling fragments for miles. Windows shattered 50 miles away. A 2-ton anchor from the ship was thrown more than 2 miles inland. The shockwave was felt as far as Cape Breton, and some said even in Boston. In an instant, Halifax was flattened. A tidal wave from the blast swept across the harbour. Fires ignited everywhere. Thousands were trapped in the wreckage of their homes, and the human cost was staggering. Nearly 2,000 people killed and over 9,000 injured, and tens of thousands left homeless. It was, at the time, the largest man-made explosion in history, second only to the atomic bomb decades later. The horror didn't end there. The very next day, a blizzard rolled in, burying survivors under snow and complicating rescue efforts. Halifax was left looking like a frozen war zone. Entire districts were reduced to piles of rubble and ash, the waterfront a blackened wasteland. Families searched desperately for loved ones, while hospitals overflowed with the wounded. But in the face of devastation, help poured in. Rescue workers and medical teams from across Canada rushed to Halifax, joined by ships from the United States loaded with supplies. The city of Boston became a key supporter, sending doctors, nurses, and relief funds, a bond still remembered today, as Nova Scotia sends a Christmas tree to Boston every year in thanks. The rebuild took years. Entire neighbourhoods had to be reconstructed from the ground up. Wooden homes replaced with sturdier, fire-resistant buildings. At a tragedy came urban reforms, better planning, new hospitals, and stricter shipping regulations. The Halifax Explosion left scars that never fully healed, but it also revealed resilience. Survivors rebuilt their city from the ruins, carrying forward a warning of how quickly life can be shattered and how communities can rise from the ashes of disaster. Thanks for joining me for another week on Just a Little Creepy. If you like hearing these tales, why not subscribe to my channel? It'll really encourage me to go out there and find some more creepy tales for you. Until then, I'll see you next week.